We're going to continue that exploration with a presentation by Don Bowser. He's a Canadian working in anti-corruption since 1998, when he joined Transparency International as its first program officer for the former Soviet Union. Since leaving Transition International in 2001, Don has been providing policy advice on anti-corruption around the globe, mostly in the former Soviet Union and Asia, but also in Africa. He's currently finishing his PhD at the University of Melbourne in Australia and has a Master's of Arts from the Central European University in Budapest and a Bachelor's from Acadia University in Odessa State in the USSR. Don will talk to us about how New Brunswick compares to other countries he has worked with. It's not a pretty picture.
Thanks. Thanks for that. Of course, Louise left out the most important point, is that I'm a New Brunswicker. Bowser's a good Moncton name, right? Yeah. Basically, I went overseas like most New Brunswickers, trying to find employment and everything else. And I came back in 2006 and moved back to Parkendale in Albert County. How many Albert County people do we have? Okay, not enough, obviously. And of course, everybody knows Parkendale because all roads in Albert County basically lead out there. And what got me interested in this is coming back, and I had just been in Afghanistan, and I came back to New Brunswick, and I saw a lot of economic activity going on. There was trucks ripping up the roads on the 895 every day. And you'd see all of this economic activity going on, but there was no public consultations whatsoever. And so having worked in a lot of bad places, you see that, even in the darkest parts of Africa, no company would go into a town and start drilling and putting up well pads without having any sort of public consultation. So I was really shocked. And this is what started me on this path of looking at what is actually going on with natural resources in New Brunswick. So I'm going to talk a little bit. I just got back from a place called Tajikistan. I know nobody's ever heard of it. My kids that I would teach at Dalhousie used to always make fun of it. They say I'm the only guy they ever know who ever went there. But you'll be hearing a lot more of it because it's basically the new front line. Being just north of Afghanistan, a good chunk of the world's heroin comes through that border. And I just wanted to do a little comparison because this is a thing that we all sort of fail sometimes to realize is how bad things have gotten in New Brunswick. So I did a little comparison. And I looked at it from the point of view of saying, where are we in comparison to other places? Now, Tajikistan is a pretty dark corner of the world. It's a place that's being considered almost to be a failed state. But what do they have? Well, they have a lot of mountains, they got a few forests, and they have a lot of natural resources. So if you compare the two and you see that Tajikistan is a place with an economy based on natural resources. You look at New Brunswick, and you see economy based on natural resources with some industrial production. Now, all the internationals cry about Tajikistan being run by one family, the president's. His finger is into every pie that exists. There is no economic activity that exists in Tajikistan without the president's family being involved. Sound a little bit familiar? Now I know we're not supposed to jump on the Irvings too much, but the reality is, and being a guy who's spent most of his adult life in the former Soviet Union, you saw a lot of people crying about the oligarchs that exist in Russia and elsewhere. What are oligarchs? Well, it's when the entire economy is controlled by a few people. So you see an economy run by one family clan. And we see in New Brunswick an economy run by several families and clans. So, okay, we have a couple of oligarchs, not just one, we have a couple. It's spread out a little bit. And I guess this is why we're a little bit obsessed with that one family that we're not supposed to name. It's kind of like Harry Potter, Voldemort, we're not supposed to talk about them for fear that they'll appear. Tajikistan's the poorest part of the former Soviet Union, considered to be a bit of a basket case. And our beloved New Brunswick here, poorest part of Canada. They have no free press. And here we have, as we heard, a monopoly by one company over most of the newspapers. And it's spreading out into the other media. Tajikistan is considered to be a failed state. It's a place that has gone through a nasty civil war. And if we look at the events of what is going on in Ukraine, and Ukraine is a place that's very close to my heart, the Ukrainians rose up in revolt because they were fed up with the corruption. They did in 1991, they did in 2004, and they've done it recently. And we look at what's that revolution has brought on, right? Tajikistan's the same way. People were tired of the civil war, but they're getting very tired of the corruption that exists within their own country. Now, it's considered to be one of the most corrupt countries in the world. Transparency International puts it in the top 5% of countries in terms of corruption. In New Brunswick, we don't really know the level of corruption because nobody's looked at it. So this is one of the things that I've come back as an anti-corruption expert, and we tried to do a cross-Canada corruption survey to compare all the provinces of corruption several years ago. But we found out that nobody wanted to talk about this. Corruption is the C word. You're not allowed to discuss it. It doesn't exist. Do we have corruption in Canada? We got corruption in New Brunswick? Yeah, but we don't like to talk about it very much, do we? And certainly nobody's talking about it in our media. And so the way that the president is able to control everybody in Tajikistan is he has the myth that do what I say or we go back to civil war. And as we heard, the myth of control here is do what we say or you lose your job. Now, if you're stubborn enough to stay in New Brunswick, tough it out, no matter what. And as a person who came back from overseas, I have to admit it was a struggle. I came back, I just wanted to be home. And it's taken me years to find decent employment. Not that there's a big need for corruption experts here in New Brunswick, but I'm pretty flexible. I spent 3.5 years in the German post office driving a forklift, so I'm more than willing to roll up my sleeves and do any job that comes my way. That's a big hint to everybody, by the way. I'd like to get out of Halifax and come back home. But this is the big myth of control. Do what we say or the jobs get it. And this is the way that any regime can control its people, right? You have a myth. Things could get a lot worse if you don't do what we say. So we talk about corruption. We don't like to discuss it because we don't really have it. And, you know, we're all nice, polite Canadians, so we don't like to discuss unpleasant things. Corruption is defined by Transparency International and other international organizations as the misuse of entrusted power for private gain. That sound familiar? But most people consider corruption just to be bribery, kickbacks, procurement schemes that make a politician money. Now, we know that in New Brunswick, don't we? Now, if certain provincial leaders, fathers, happen to be the beneficiaries of contracts, we don't consider that to be conflict of interest, do we? Now, because the Premier didn't know what his old man was up to, obviously. They have a very close relationship, I guess, when you don't know what your father's business is. But corruption is also nepotism, patronage, fraud, theft, political party financing that's misused, collusion, anti-competitive behavior, and conflict of interest. Do we know some of those things? Yeah? Do we know about collusion? When several companies manipulate the entire process so that they all benefit? Conflict of interest? And yeah, well, that's what I was referring to earlier, our friends at ATCON. But this is what's great. And, you know, there was a thing in the Chronicle Herald the other day in Halifax that the same thing is going on in Nova Scotia as well, right? So the guy from Bowater gets to join DNR. So the one that knows the business is able to manipulate the regulatory process. And I had this one time in Armenia, the head of the central bank opened a bank. And the International said, well, we think that's conflict of interest. He said, why? I know the business. I'm the head of the central bank. Why shouldn't I own a bank? What conflict is there? Now, a lot of people laughed about that on the international side. They said, oh, come on, how can you do that? Well, that sounds kind of familiar to us, doesn't it? Right? How can you regulate the very business in which you're in? Isn't that the business of government, to regulate things? So how, on one hand, can you profit from an industry and regulate it at the same time? Now, corruption has two levels. Administrative corruption, right? Paying bribes to get a service. Now, when I came back, it took me 2 years to get my driver's license, even though I had a perfectly good Cambodian one. And Dominic Hardy being here, he knows how hard it is to get a Cambodian driver's license. I think I was the only guy who actually did it without paying a bribe. But I came back and it took me about 2 years. Now, of course, you know, people say in other countries where I work, how stupid are you? Why can't you just pay, you know, 50 bucks and get it? I said, well, it doesn't work that way. We don't have that level of administrative corruption, right? So in a lot of other countries, you simply pay a small fee and you get cheap cable, or you don't pay your electricity bill, et cetera, et cetera. So we don't really have that. Now, the other level of corruption is grand level corruption, or what we call state capture. And there's actually a mathematical formula for corruption. It's corruption equals monopoly plus discretion minus accountability. So C equals M plus D minus A. That means you have a monopoly on power and you're able to make the decisions without anybody holding you accountable. Do we have a situation like that in New Brunswick? How many people are held accountable for the things that they do? How many politicians are able to exercise discretion without being held accountable for their actions? So what is state capture? Well, state capture is a fancy idea that some guys in the World Bank came up with who were working in Russia and Ukraine. Danny Kaufman and Joel Hellman. And I used to always rally against them every time we'd have a conference, you know, because as Charles points out, and I'm glad to see that the leader of the revolution is a little guy from Kedgwick. He's great. And I basically came into this by contacting Charles and said, boy, do I have a story for you. Let's talk. And he responded. And I've been doing this for years, throwing out messages in a bottle, seeing if anybody responded. Charles responded, and that was it. So you see that state capture is the idea that businesses create their own laws, policies, and regulations to their own advantage. Now, in most developing countries, this is done with a kickback. So when the World Bank presented this idea, I said, no, guys, you know, I don't think this really applies to Russia or Ukraine, because the businessmen are the politicians. The politicians are the businessmen. There's no difference. But I said, I think it applies to my own little home province, because there the corporations are able to essentially write their own rules. Right? Wouldn't that be great if we were going down the road and we could drive as fast as we want because we've written the speed code in that zone? Right? How is it possible that a company is able to write its own regulations? So you have regulatory capture in which a business will write its own rules, and that happens in a lot of businesses in the airline industry and other industries. So it's not unique. But state capture occurs when one company is able to write the rules across many different sectors or industries. And they are the ones that are really benefit. So you have a small number of people who write all the rules, and they're the ones, at the end of the day, who are the main beneficiaries. And it only works if you have a system that is absolutely opaque, right? There's no transparency. Nobody's asking any questions. Everybody just keeps their heads down, right? And that's the New Brunswick way. If you're stubborn enough to stay here, you know you better shut your mouth. All right? Or the next place you're going to go is Tajikistan. Now you laugh about that, but that's always what I tell the border guys when I meet them. I say, I do a lot of border stuff. That's your next posting. So the problem we have is access to information. New Brunswick, and you know, I say this as a person who loves this province. I gave up permanent residency in Germany to come back here. I know, stupid, yeah, it's Europe, it's nice, the weather is far better. You know, my first winter back, and you always have this romanticization. So the whole time I was abroad, I was like, you know, green fields, flowers, you know, streams and everything else, and you come back and suffer through that first winter. And I know exactly what the pioneers felt like. So when my forefathers landed here, the first winter they survived. By the second winter, they have scurvy and barely make it alive. I feel that pain. So coming back, I forgot about how bad the winters were. And after shoveling snow for a couple of winters, I curse myself sometimes. But, you know, what happens is, as somebody who loves his province, and you see that we're ranked last in an assessment of access to information legislation. So the Centre for Law and Democracy in Halifax, that works internationally, came out and they did a cross-Canada comparison, and we came in dead last. Okay, well, it's one organization. Well, yeah, but we also earned an F in terms of information disclosure. And it's good to see David Kuhn here because he's just been fighting this battle as well. Right? Why are we not allowed to see the contracts for the resources which we own? How is it possible? If you rented a house and you were told, no, I'm sorry, you can't see the rental agreement for your house, that's a corporate secret. It's the same thing. We own the shale gas. We own the forest. So why are we not allowed to know what our province is doing in terms of giving away? And this is what shocks me the most. So I was just looking over the mining law from Afghanistan. Every company is forced to publish all the details. They tried to argue this, that it was a corporate secret. They were defeated. And now Afghanistan, with its 13% literacy rate, war and everything else, is far beyond us in terms of transparency. Companies are forced to disclose what they're paying to the host government. So we have media concentration. One company owns most of the press. And everybody says it's a concern. The Senate, okay, yeah, besides fiddling their expenses, they get concerned once in a while about New Brunswick media. Everybody's concerned about it, except for us. Right? We just accept it. And across the world now, the push is towards to have transparency within the extractive industries. So all over the world, everyone has said that companies need to publish what they're paid, and governments need to publish the revenues that they're collecting from companies on the extractive industries. Right? So the forest, mining, and the oil and gas need to show what revenues they're actually generating. Does that happen here at home? No. Everywhere else in the world. And Canada actually spends quite a bit of money in Tanzania and other places to make sure that they are able to live up to their obligations under the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative. So we spend money, but we're sure as hell not going to do it here in Canada, even though 60% of the extractive companies are Canadian. Bit ironic that, eh? And I saw a bit in the Globe Mail a couple of months ago where New Brunswick declared if they were forced to publish the contracts, they were going to secede from Confederation. That's it, we're out. If we have to publish what we're actually charging people for our natural resources, we'll leave the Confederation. Yeah, so we become a separatist micro-statelet. I don't know, maybe we'll invite the Russians to take us over. I don't know, we'll fight it out. Yeah, the People's Republic of New Brunswick. Determined to opaqueness and secrecy. Maybe we'll take out the boat and put in a black flag or something. Right? No, and it's just striking. You know, you tell people this, and there's actually a New Brunswicker who works for Mining Watch, an international NGO based out in Vancouver. And he said, I'll come back. I'll help you in any way I can because I just love my province and this is the sort of things that go on. Right? So what do we know? What do we know about the revenues? Well, the only information that you can actually get in terms of the shale gas is the annual reports published by Corridor. Last year, Corridor was bold enough to brag about that they pay an effective royalty rate of 3%. This year, sadly, they had to report that it's gone up to 4%. Now, of course, everybody says, well, no, but you get other advantages later on, and there are jobs created and everything else. As we've seen, there aren't jobs created. That's just not happening. And on the other side, the 4% that they collect is far less than the 10% that was originally agreed to, and a lot less than what Alberta charges, which is about 17%. Right? So it's a sliding scale. You're supposed to collect actually more revenues off of the gas after 5 years. Well, after 5 years, all the gas is gone. So how are you going to collect any royalties rates? But to try and get this information from the government of New Brunswick doesn't exist. So what is hurting us as an internationally competitive environment? Now, Canadian companies argue that foreign countries that don't have transparency in their extractive industries make it very difficult for them to invest in. So is that increasing the investment climate of New Brunswick? Right? That's what it's supposed to do. We're supposed to be business friendly. But actually we're not business friendly because no other businesses know what the royalty rates that they're supposed to pay are. They have several policies that have been put out, some of which were put out by LePierre, which was basically a paragraph saying, well, it might be good. Okay, oh, well, we have a new regulation. But the regulation is so unclear itself that nobody really knows what royalties they're going to pay for. So who besides Corridor and SWIN, and we really don't know who's behind SWIN, right, when you look at the corporate registries, who's going to invest here? And so the idea is if you don't do what we say, we'll leave, and nobody will look at coming to New Brunswick. Well, I don't think that's true. And I think the lesson that we have from Danny Williams is when you stand up to the big companies and you say, you pay me what you owe, you pay me what's fair, guess what? They'll come back to the table. Because if they don't, the Chinese or somebody else will. And you know, given the problems in Russia, and there's a lot of dirty money coming out of Russia, I don't know, I think we might be better off selling the whole place. I have some Russian oligarch friends. I can make some calls for the government if they're interested. And trust me, there's guys in Russia who could buy and sell the Irvings 10 times over. So I don't know, maybe we might be better off. But certainly what we don't have is any transparency in this. And without transparency and without a competitive environment, we're really not going to have economic development. We're just going to be getting deeper and deeper in debt. 11 billion now, right? At what point do we become bankrupt? And then what's going to happen? So that's what our friends over at the UDM have said, is that New Brunswick is on the verge of going bankrupt. We will be the first jurisdiction in Canada to become bankrupt. We'll become the Detroit of Canada. Yeah. Who's going to buy us then? Maybe. But if they buy us outright, will they keep up the roads and pay for the hospitals and do everything else? I mean, if we could make them sign up to that and say, we'll sell you outright the entire province of New Brunswick. 15 billion, plus you fix the roads, plus you build the hospitals, and you improve the schools. And you have to have a literacy rate up to 80%, and you have to have everybody healthy and happy, and everybody gets a job. So my friends at the Council of Canadians were surprised when I said that, but I said, you know, at the end of the day, that would still be a better deal than what we have now. Deep in debt, no jobs, no possibilities, and we're losing money on every natural resource we have. We lose money on every tree we cut down, and we lose money on every cubic meter of gas. So how do we fight this? And I wanted to be positive and give some hope. We put institutional constraints on companies. So we actually regulate the businesses that we're supposed to be regulating. The other side of it is politically, have political accountability. How do we do that? Well, if you get caught in a conflict of interest, you should be punished, right? Canada has the lowest rate of prosecution of white-collar crime and corruption in the developed world. The Italians are way better at it than we are. It's true. Yeah, right. We just do not prosecute corruption and conflict of interest and the rest of it. We have to have a competitive private sector. So we actually have to go out and say, guess what? Everybody gets a level playing field. Nobody gets any advantages. And I didn't talk about this, but the original British law on corruption, which we were governed under for many years, defines corruption as having an undue advantage, so that any company having an undue advantage was considered corruption. So we need a competitive private sector. We need actual public sector management. So somebody actually has to manage the public sector and not say, no, no, you companies, you just manage yourselves. We'll just sit here and drink coffee. I really don't know what all of the civil servants here in New Brunswick do. What does DNR actually do? Are they managing the natural resources? And there's a lot of good people. It's not that it's, you know, everybody in the government is evil. It's not. There's a lot of good people. We've seen through Charles's videos that after they get out of office, they're willing to come forth and essentially declare their sins. And I think that's the strongest part of what Charles has done, is that everybody involved in this great resource giveaway feels guilty about it at the end of the day. They know what they're doing to this province. When they're in office, they feel the pressure, they feel that they don't want to lose any more jobs, right? They have to go back to their constituencies. But who is actually managing the things that are going on in the province? And the final part, civil society participation. And this is civil society right here. This is it. Right? We're not an NGO. I always tell Charles he's got to put some sort of structure in place, because right now he's not a non-governmental organization. He's a non-governmental individual. Or a kamikaze pilot. We'll see how that all plays out later on. Yeah. When he disappears at some day, and he's been missing for several weeks, we'll start to wonder. But essentially, we need everybody to come forward and say enough. Business as usual is not working. So this great myth that, well, you know, we have to be business friendly. How is this being business friendly by giving away our natural resources? What does it actually do for us at the end of the day? Further in debt, $1 million a day we're losing? Are we that rich? We're 700,000+ people. That's a town with a lot of resources. We have all the woods. We have all the minerals. Look at Albert County, stocked full, right? We've known for 100 years there's been oil here. Second place in North America that starts pumping oil is good old Weldon, right? Stony Creek. So it's not like we don't know that there's resources here, and it's not that big of a deal for 700,000 people to everyone have a job and everyone have a viable future, is it? And if we did these things and managed to have a province that is essentially transparent and accountable, you'll see people coming. You'll see a lot of people coming back. So what do we need to do? Well, we need a few policy changes. We have to allow civil liberties. We have to allow access to information. And what David Kuhn just went through in trying to get access clearly points out that something is deeply wrong. When the government itself says, let the contract be published, and the government says, no, hell no, we're not doing that. How is this possible? The government has just advised you, you know, our access to information says that we should publish these contracts. The government says, no, I don't think so. We don't think it's a good idea. Corporate secret. So we have to increase our transparency and accountability. We need to address the link between the corporate and provincial governments. Let corporations, and it's not that Irving is bad, it's not that they're evil. They're doing what companies do, which is maximize profits. That's what they're in the business of doing. Government's job is to govern and to stop companies from abusing the province. So we can't blame and point the fingers and say the evil corporations are making money. That's what they exist to do. But where is the regulatory side? And we need to increase political and economic competition, right? So essentially, changing over, Libs, PC, where's that gotten us? Is there genuine political competition? Is there genuine economic competition? And so this is the point in which we say, you know, the parties really have to address some of these issues. They have to really present some sort of solid platform of how they're going to change things. And you have to get the monopolies that exist in the province broken up. It's simply anti-competitive, right? And as I said, you know, in the video that I did, if this was a small Eastern European country, everybody in the world would be crying, how is it possible that you have monopoly? How is this possible that you have oligarchs? Stop them. Raise up. right? But nobody's saying that for us. It's up to us to do it. It is up to us. Right? I've asked my friends from the World Bank, can you come in and do an intervention? And it's gotten to the point of when we're going to be bankrupt, we are going to have an intervention. And it's going to be on A&E, I think. They're going to bring everybody forward and say, what the hell were you thinking? It seemed like a good idea at the time, right? And so only through collective action, and this is why I really encourage my friends, Charles's group, and the people working on shale gas and others, to unite. Because at the end of the day, it's the same problem. The resources of the province are being given away at a loss. Even if we gave them away for free, we'd still win. But no, we give them away at a loss, so it actually costs us money. And the roads are just going to get worse, and the jobs are going to go away, and we're not going to have anything left, right? So that's it. I feel very comfortable being in a church right here because I just feel that I preached to you guys for the last few minutes. Anyways, I think together we can actually do something, and I think the tide has turned a little bit. And thanks to our little friend from Kedgwick for mobilizing everybody, and the rest of the people that are out there, CCMB and the others, and the Shale Gas Alliance, for really trying hard to wake everybody up. But I really think we have to unite. And so this is what I've been trying to do with my NGO, is just to get everybody under one umbrella to look at trying to have a coalition that wants to increase transparency, especially on the extractive industries. It's all we have at the end of the day. Thanks for your time.